Welcome to the March 15th Curriculum Subcommittee meeting of the Brookline School Committee. Welcome to all of our guests. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the February 9th, 2022 meeting minutes. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion? I will make a motion as I have read them in detail. Was there anyone who will second that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, all right, great. Then we'll take a roll call vote. Susan?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. So the minutes are approved. Thank you so much. Casey Miller is here to start us off on a presentation for understanding our differences, to provide us with some information and have some discussion. There's no particular vote that we're taking, just for context. We're just talking about the program, its current status, and plans. So Casey, the floor is yours. Thanks for coming and congratulations to your daughter. We are, for those of you who are watching, we have several attendees. Just to let you know, we needed to move the agenda order around. We will still address all the items on the agenda, but due to staff availability, we had to flip 2 items. Thanks.
Appreciate it. So I should, can folks see my screen?
Yes.
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 All right, so I'm going to get started and give a little bit of background and then also where we are today with understanding our differences. So just for folks who aren't familiar with the program, although we do have a longstanding history, meaning Brookline, and understanding our differences, UOD is a nonprofit organization that really dedicates itself to educating schools and also communities and towns on fostering respect and inclusion for people of all abilities. The way that their program works is that there's an interactive disability awareness curriculum that is delivered in schools by volunteers. And I can go into a little bit in terms of what their program looks like now, because they have had to shift their delivery model a little bit since the pandemic to still be able to make the impact that they have been in school districts by offering essentially remote presentations versus in-person presentations, but that the curriculum is implemented in public school districts. And then the third bullet there lists some of the units that are covered, the topics that are covered in the schools where they do implement the curriculum. So they cover blindness and low vision, deafness and hard of hearing, autism, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, and others that are listed there. In terms of their programming, I mentioned this a little bit in the last slide, but they are presentations that are delivered to students, usually by individuals with that particular, or living with that particular disability that is being delivered, the unit topic that is being delivered. Teachers also have access to the materials. I should say that also UOD, Understanding Our Differences, was developed by a group of families with children with disabilities out of Newton, so not too far from here, but they've partnered with the Newton Public Schools, but they're also in dozens of districts across the state who delivered this curriculum. And so they have units that are already built out that are delivered. And so teachers have access to these units if they wanted to do an intro for students before the speaker comes and any follow-up afterwards. There are additional materials that are provided for districts that contract with the program. And then of course the speakers come with the program also. Whoops, sorry about that. So I mentioned that we, meaning Brookline Public Schools, have a long history with the program. We were a partner school with UOD for 30 plus years, where we were implementing the curriculum for quite a while. In, let me make sure I get my dates right, in between 2014 and 2016, we actually had a full curriculum review that was completed of the units that Newton offered. The review was overseen by Amy Martin, who worked here on the 5th floor before my time, but worked for OTL, and it included professional staff and parents too. And I think probably Susan and Helen may remember this, but the design team really looked at their work around, I think it was 2018, when they really started to develop essentially some of their own units. So meaning Brookline specific units. My understanding, and again, this review was done before my time, but the information that I have is that Brookline's message about disabilities, empathy, and inclusion were slightly different from Newton's message. And so Brookline went ahead and developed some of its own units. I know that there is an autism unit that was developed, and I believe there was one that was redesigned. The unit was on chronic medical conditions. But we continue to partner with understanding our differences. We did hire at some point our own staff coordinator. That person was paid on the para scale, and we've had a couple of folks who held that position. And essentially they ensured that we had speakers and they were scheduled. We also had volunteers who came into the classrooms, worked alongside principals to make sure that there was time scheduled in the student's day. We also provided reimbursements for and honorariums for speakers. And then of course for our volunteers, I recall our most recent coordinator would have coffees and just thank you events for our volunteers, and also some training for folks. My understanding is that we did target the 4th grade at all of our K-8 schools in the last iteration of the program. So it was a mix of Newton curriculum and also what Brookline developed. I have been in talks with their director this year just to learn a bit more about what their program looks like now. And I mentioned that they have speakers and materials all online. So there's less coordinating in that sense, but you would still have to have an adult in the classroom while it's being delivered. So the program was put on pause in 2020 for last school year, because we had a budget deficit and we were looking at just different ways to cut costs across the district, but also at that time, we weren't sure how COVID-19 would unfold in our schools. And given that the program is delivered in person, it seemed like a safe move to put the program on pause. Since then, I have been talking with folks from the UOD program, but also with the Office of Teaching and Learning, and thinking about how this fits into essential curriculum and other work that we are doing with wellness in terms of what we cover in advisory, also with our school counselors. I'll actually exit out so that we can begin more of a discussion about it, just so folks are updated in terms of where we are, and then I'm happy to take questions. But the conversation that we've been having is, where does this fit into our curriculum? And more importantly, how does this fit into what is our philosophy in terms of curricular materials and topics? Do we have our educators design this, or are we bringing in outside providers to supplement, or maybe it's not even supplement at this point, it's really deliver essential curriculum topics? If any of my OTL colleagues want to jump in terms of the topics, I did ask Michelle, who oversees K-8 for teaching and learning, how much of this is actually covered in our units now across the content. And it's not a lot. It's not as much as what the UOD curriculum offers. But again, I think the conversation is very much still active in terms of how we do want to make sure that these topics are covered.
So is it something that is this something the district is going to move ahead with, like putting back into the budget for next year? Or is that, I'm just kind of wondering where we're at and what our plans are moving forward. And I really want to open it up to other members of the subcommittee who may have questions about the current status, the history, and the present plans.
Yeah, I think the short answer is we don't have plans to add it right now. right now, each unit, the delivery of the unit, I believe, takes about an hour, if not a little bit more. And so if we're thinking 2 to 4 a year, that's potentially 4 hours, which might not seem like a lot, but it could be a lot for a classroom teacher who could be covering something else or covering it in their own way, or have it embedded in a particular content area.
Have we gotten teacher feedback about how, this amount of time feels for them? Or have we thought about spreading it out over several grade levels and having a progression of 3, 4, 5? I know I heard you mentioning, advisory, but that's typically maybe middle school, but definitely high school age students. And this program is really in more of our elementary bracket. So I'm just sort of wondering what other ideas have bounced around, and particularly teacher feedback on this.
Yeah, so that would be the next step, is really to hear about from the teachers what their experience has been, because they're the ones who are in the classrooms watching it unfold, most of them anyways.
Stephen, so we haven't gotten that information yet because it's budget season and I'm just concerned about the timeliness. But all right, go ahead, Stephen, and then Helen.
Okay, thanks, Jen. So you took my first question, which is, do we have teacher feedback? This is for anyone who knows this, including you, Susan and Helen. What does it mean to say that they were a partner school for 30 plus years? Does that mean the services you describe, or what you describe as constituting constituting UOD, was implemented in Brookline in full, or was there some version of it, or what does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, I put that up there. It means that we bought their curriculum and we used it. But I imagine, and again, I wasn't here, but it seemed like we provided feedback as they were retooling their programming also.
Helen, Susan, do you think you can help deepen my understanding as well? What the history of our usage of UOD was? I'm also really interested, Casey and others, about whether we had a staff coordinator with UOD as well.
We did.
We did.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I can only talk from way back history, and so that's not relevant. Maybe Susan can, but my question was a little different. I'm trying to understand the review that we did, which I must say, I've been on the curriculum committee and I don't remember it coming back to curriculum. You may have done the review with Amy. Do you remember, Susan?
I do remember the discussion at curriculum. It was not a full program review, but I do remember there were some concerns that that Amy was attempting to address. So there was one set of concerns, for example, just as one example that I remember, was about how autism was presented. I think an older way to present autism was more of a disability. I think there was concern among parents, rightfully so, that was not really the appropriate way to present autism. And so there were some adjustments made in that in particular, especially kind of from an asset-based, way of thinking. And, the notion that it's not just children who, with autism who have to change somehow, like the classroom also has to kind of, it's not just sort of an othering exercise. So I do remember this conversation. I don't know. I think it was more of an advice and consent. I don't remember voting on anything.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't remember it being cut, to be honest, in the last budget.
No, this was during the budget that we didn't see.
Oh, okay. And then I don't, I mean, I guess I'm a little concerned about there not being any funding for it for next year, because just from my experience with my kids, when we had it, I thought it was very helpful for kids. I thought it was important. And fourth grade was about the right time to do this stuff. It's when kids are really sort of exploring out there and figuring out what's going on in the world. And they're still receptive to hearing things and haven't formed all sorts of biases or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I know I'm concerned with, and again, it's not a huge amount of time, but if we're thinking, like Jennifer mentioned, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, it's pulling away from something. So it is an hour it's not from their lunchtime, it is an hour from their academic day. And so what are we pulling from? And that's one concern of mine. when we're delivering this curriculum.
Casey, oh, I'm sorry, Susan.
If it's direct follow-up, go ahead, because I didn't have anything directly on that.
Nope.
Okay. Helen, were you done or did you? Helen, you're on mute.
Sorry. I was wondering, Leslie, you must have had experience at Pierce. Right now, I can't remember the name of your school. With this, and what was your thinking about it?
Yeah, so I think it's an amazing program. I think that it was really great to have families integrated into the work and the way that they came into the schools. And I think we all know that any type of conversation with children, especially at kind of the intermediate elementary level around these topics, is really useful. I think the place where I think it's just a place where we need to do more work. I think that, this isn't new information, right? But as we're sorting through curriculum and scope and sequences, I think that understanding our differences is a consideration. And I just don't think we're ready to commit to it at the moment because we have so many curriculum issues. I mean, Greg's going to talk a little bit about social studies. When Emily came, she talked about specifically in K-8, the lack of alignment around standards. Matt, extensively talked about the rollout of math. And so my priority, at least in this position, is around those core content areas and making sure that we have that in the place where it's supposed to be. And I'm not saying understanding our differences is a second thought. I'm just saying in terms of prioritizing, we haven't got to understanding our differences yet. And I do think that we should get teacher feedback. We just haven't had a chance to do that. We've just been really, on the ball with so many other pieces. And so it might be more of an issue of we need to do more of a review and we need some more time to do that before we fully commit to it. And I don't know how others feel. I should have started by saying that's my personal opinion.
Oh, can I throw something in there? I guess I just have a question. I understand, because I think what I'm hearing the conversation be is this as sort of a curriculum itself. And I think it's a piece of curriculum. And I think like as a program, it is, but when you look at the scope of that versus like a reading program or a math program, and I just want to be careful that we aren't honing in on something that we aren't going to ignore. We are going to get that content in. It may be that it's understanding our differences. It may be that it's a different integration in, but that it's not being considered as a curriculum like some of our other things, because it is a piece that goes into our other curriculum and our other pieces. And so I just hearing the conversation, I would hate to put the emphasis on bringing this in right now, having it also interrupt something else. And the fact that it is a visiting program. It is not an entire curriculum part of our instruction.
Meaning some bits and pieces are covered at our schools,
Yeah.
but it differs. So I know at Runkle, we have a teacher who is hard of hearing, and so she designed her own unit to explain to her students, to teach her students what deaf and hard of hearing looks like. I know that at the high school, I don't think I'm breaching any confidentiality, but I had a teacher tell me yesterday that he took some time and did a unit on autism, given who is in his classroom. So it's happening in different places.
But
And
I guess that's the piece that worries me. So you have those individual experiences that people share, and those kids who are in those classes get that benefit. But what about the rest?
Yep.
And on top of that,
I hear what you're saying, and I'm just sort of questioning. I'm not sure, where I'm coming down on this, but I hear what you're saying, Michelle. We want to embed it. That would be beautiful if we knew everybody was doing that in all the different spheres. But I'm not clear that is what.
No, but I think that comes back to Leslie's point. Like, we are struggling across the district to ensure that everybody is getting the same social studies, that the experiences are the same and that piece. And so I think to hone in on this piece when we really need to get the other, and we were going to do an update during our piece later on curriculum, but really making sure that it's really clear to teachers what they are expected to teach and getting that commonality. And then as part of that process, getting this in thoughtfully, whether again, it's understanding our differences or something that's homegrown. But I think to your point, Helen, like talking about kids getting something in one place and not the other, that's sort of a current experience in Brookline. And we're trying to work on that even in the core content areas.
Well, and that's
I
why
agree.
having this program was something that we knew every kid would go through.
Right. I want to sort
I'm
of
done.
add to what
Susan.
Helen's saying. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Susan, then I'll go.
Okay, just to pick up on some of that, and there were a couple other ideas as well. I mean, one is that, just to echo what Helen said, I don't think we had an actual conversation at the school committee about not funding it for 2021. And I don't recall a conversation about not funding it for 21-22 either. So I understand that we've had like a lot of budget issues and it's not really clear kind of what comes to us and what doesn't. But just as we go forward, I won't be here for more than 7 weeks, but I think that there's something really important about the school committee having a good heads up when things like this are changing, especially if they're going to go away for a pandemic and then not come back now that we're back. I think that's just a really important thing to highlight for the school committee. Sort of along those lines, I don't think that it's our place to I personally don't think it's the school committee's place to start picking and choosing among curriculum per se, or exactly where it goes in the school day. I think that's micromanaging. That said, I do think it's important for us to kind of weigh in, for example, on whether we would say it's okay not to teach this sort of thing at all. So more at the learning expectation or not, policy, small p level. And I guess for me personally, it would be more important for me sort of thinking about a whole child development, that every single one of our kids like really understands what autism is, rather than one more unit of math or one more unit of science. So I guess I would just sort of, if I have a thumb to put on the scales, I would say it's actually really important to think through, given how much we're trying to pack in, like which pieces we kind of excise entirely and kind of what that does to the whole child piece of what we're trying to do. So in fact, I actually had almost the opposite question, which was, I've certainly know of kids who did not get this in 4th grade, and then they kind of like never got it, right? Because they weren't there in 4th grade, they missed that day, whatever it was. And then we just didn't have any sort of like, sort of redundancy in the system because it was trying to get packed in. So I guess I almost have sort of the opposite question, which is, I'm absolutely comfortable leaving this in the hands of staff to kind of figure out, is it an outside program that we bring in? Is it something that our staff do, whatever, but, and kind of how we do it, but that we do it, it seems to me like it's really important that we do it even while we're figuring out how to do it, if that makes sense. And I don't quite know what that looks like, but I think this is too important, especially as we think about just incidents of bias and bullying and othering. And this one's too important to just let go entirely. So I'm very open to how we might do this next year, but I'd be quite concerned if the answer was we weren't going to teach about these different experiences, either through our social emotional curriculum level, hi Greg, or through, some of our other time periods to do this, and not just for 4th grade. So I guess that's one set of things about budget and just a policy comment. I guess I have a second set of questions, which is, I do know that when it was implemented, implementation, Michelle, to your point, varied pretty dramatically. There were certainly some kids and families who had a great experience with this, whose children experienced special needs or whatnot, and they had a great experience. There were others where there was, I hate the word trigger warning, but there was like no preparation for this, either from the class or for that student or the family. And so there were some pretty difficult experiences with 4th graders who were experiencing special needs, who didn't quite, like they were a little, I don't want to say shell shocked. They were a little bit sort of startled by this, and they didn't necessarily have the right groundwork and preparation. So all of which is to say, like, I think doing this really well is important. And I know that that variability has created issues. I guess I would just get concerned if we're saying, as we do the budget, we're going to zero this out again, versus we're going to put money in. And yes, we have to figure it out, but it's only March. We have time to figure it out. But the budget line is there in some way, shape, or form. So that would be my contribution for whatever, if that's helpful.
Mhm.
I think I'm going to be repeating Helen and Susan a little bit. I think there's some overlap. It's not for me, it's not necessarily understanding our differences, but what we're covering in the curriculum that matters. And so my concern is, if we say we're not going to fund it and we don't really have a plan for how we're going to cover it ourselves, that makes me nervous, just that it's been 2 years off. So just thinking about sort of the big picture about what our kids are getting really high level. If we don't have a plan, I just don't know what the ability for us to follow through on that consistently. I hear the story of one teacher, who has that really great teachable moment or opportunity to share this lesson on whether it's autism or hard of hearing. But then again, we're creating that inequity across our schools that we really don't want, where some kids are getting access to that experience and other kids are not. And so in the very least, like, understanding our differences, if we had a set number of units even that we were doing, creates that consistency until we can figure out what we want to do, whether that's a review or we only do 1 unit or 2, whatever. That's not that, I don't even have an opinion about that. I just worry that if some teachers are taking that academic time, which is fine with me, to do those units that are really teachable and really relevant and help students, it's hard to also argue that a programmatic approach to it, whether it's a series of lessons, is taking away those 4 hours of time. Some teachers are already doing that. So that's a tough argument for me to sort of like balance in my head. And if we're gonna cut it without a plan to move forward, I'm just wondering, at what expense are we doing that? Not financial, but what expense to our students? So that's my concern, if we don't have an actual plan.
So this is helpful. And what I'm hearing is a few things, and I just want to share my thoughts with folks. One is we need to look at the roadmap, like the 30,000 foot view, or take 500 steps back to see where we are teaching these topics. And I think part of it is related to my second point, which is we need teacher feedback to hear, was this a high leverage program? How did did this inform further conversations, discussions, learnings with your classes when we did have the program or not? I have certainly heard from some teachers where they didn't feel like it was the most impactful learning, but it was an hour, so no biggie. And so I'd love to hear from them, but then also maybe another question to ask them is, where in your lessons do you embed some of this, the teachings on inclusion and tolerance, right? But then this other piece is the very real piece that Leslie alluded to, is OTL along with OSS. We have a lot of initiatives coming along with a district strategic plan. Right. We have a lot of program reviews also happening. And so there's a capacity piece. So when we had, to your question earlier, Stephen, when we had a program coordinator, that person, I believe, was close to a 1.0 on the para scale. So that was an FTE that we carried on the budget, in addition to purchasing the curriculum, which, at a $130 million budget, I think it was maybe between $6,000 and $10,000 to buy the curriculum. So not a ton of money, but that one FTE coordinated a lot of that work. And so when we think about what's in the budget for next year, I mean, I can tell you that one FTE isn't in the budget specifically to coordinate UOD, but if we're looking at where we are currently in the budget, we haven't landed that budget yet. So I want to be mindful about talking about having this program be reinstituted without the human power to do that work, to actually coordinate all of the sites. So I do think in terms of a plan, Jennifer, I'm going towards the sort of a roadmap of where this is covered, but informed by teachers to let us know, fourth grade teachers across the board, what their experience has been and what are you teaching?
Do any of you know what it was like before we had the position? I don't remember when the position came into being. I do remember it used to be a all volunteer, parent-run type program.
Yeah, I asked around. So Linda Kirby and Betsy Fitzpatrick were the folks who've been here longest. And they said, I don't know, but look up this one person. And this person was here like 20 plus years ago. And that person was a volunteer. And then at some point, it turned into an FTE.
And we do still know the person who was that FTE. It was actually a parent of a child with special, was engaged with the special education community. And so I think one of the things also was to be a little bit of a bridge between some of the CPAC families and students, and as well as sort of a coordinator. So there was a number of things that person did. So it may be worth asking that individual who held that role. And I can put you in touch with her if you don't have her, I'm sure you have her contact information, but if not. And I think she probably had a lot of opinions as to how it went also, but I do think that connection to families and feedback from families as to how it went and students for what it would look like, I think that's an important piece also, again, all of which is to say it needs planning, but I guess I would almost just ask the question of, given that if there's agreement that it needs some planning, what could it look like so that we don't lose a third year of the material? Maybe that's a better way to ask the question.
Has there been any conversation with CPAC around any of their feedback on understanding our differences? And has there been any communication with them about it?
I mean, we've talked about it, but nothing official. When you say feedback, nothing like, there was no survey or anything like that.
And maybe that's where we start, right? Like maybe, it's not a tremendous amount of money. It's not a small amount of money, but it's a manageable amount of money. And so maybe we take next year to get feedback from teachers, to be in touch with CPAC. I know that nobody really likes the idea of some classrooms implementing while others aren't, but I know that there are some classrooms that may be ready. There was a teacher at Baker who asked me about the program very early on in the school year. And so maybe we make it manageable for people who are ready to implement, to continue implementation while we get feedback, and then come to you with a cooked plan. But I just want to be, again, I want to be mindful of our capacity. I don't want to say we're going to do something and then we don't do it well. And at the same time, I know while nobody kind of like, some classrooms are implementing, some are not, in all honesty, that's what we're dealing with across our content areas. And we're trying to make all of our content more standard. And I don't mean standardized, I just mean knowing that no matter what school you go to, no matter whose class you're in, that you have access to the same content. And so it's a journey that we're on in many ways. And so,
So my sense is there's probably maybe at least a quarter, maybe to half of the fourth grade teachers, or the third and fourth, whoever may have done this program, that wouldn't need that like you're talking about. And if do we pay by the district, or do we pay by the class? Do we pay by the school for this program?
So you pay by, at least what the quote that they've given me, we pay by the unit.
By the unit.
Yeah. Yeah. So we pay by the unit and curriculum materials.
But if it's just $10,000 or $12,000, that's not a lot of money.
No, it's not a lot of money, but again, it just goes back to all the issues that Susan brought up when she was talking. Yeah.
Can I just chime in to say that I think the approach that you've all outlined makes a ton of sense. Like, this is super high priority. And Leslie and Casey, I think you're right on when you say you need to do further analysis to determine to what extent this particular curricular offering meets our needs. So I'm just like, rah, everyone.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, it sounds like it's not going to run next year, and you're going to gather information next year. Is that what I'm hearing? And if so, and if that's not what I'm hearing, if you could correct me.
I think that is accurate. I think we want to also be mindful of our own capacity and what's coming down the pike in terms of the district strategic plan too, and how that folds in.
And what I don't know, I don't know enough about, which I guess that's a good thing. When I was at Pierce, I feel like it just ran. I don't remember being involved in any of the planning of that. I just remember going to class and like, oh, this is happening. What is our ability or capacity to teachers that are prepared and can run it? Is there planning on our end centrally? Is this something that they can do with minimal support? I don't know that information. And I think that would be information we need to know if we can offer it to teachers to kind of run with it if they're ready to do so. But I don't know.
The units are pretty similar year over year. So if you run it once, it's pretty similar. And with their new format that they're doing, it's you get the materials instead of running, well, one possibility is that instead of running 3 stations, which is typically how it's been, where you collaborate across a grade, it's typically 1, and that class has that one activity that they provide the materials for, and then it's a Zoom presentation instead of an in-person visitor. So it is a shorter amount of time, and it's pretty much self-contained within each classroom. So I think there's at least the possibility that teachers could implement it if they wanted to. I mean, obviously feedback would be really important from educators about, I guess I'm just still grappling with whether or not the decision to not run it is based in pedagogy or cost or both, and how we would go about answering those questions. I just don't want us to forget to come back to us if it's going to take a year. I just don't want us to forget that we were going to come back and have this conversation about what happened and what was the plan. Just because there are, to your point, there's so many things going on, so many program reviews, but this is, I don't think this is the extent of a program review because it's smaller. Susan?
Again, I don't want to reiterate, but if there isn't a way to run it sort of full throttle for next year, I wonder if there is a way to figure out, as we just said, if there are teachers who do feel comfortable running it and through stipends or some other way to do it, roll out what we can do. Because I do think that I worry again about losing a 3rd year. And so if there are ways to bring this material in somehow, and specifically like the way that what's most important to me is that all of the other kids in the classrooms not only understand the difference, but understand what that means for them as a classroom member, if they do have children with those experiences in their classroom. And that I do worry about. So if there are ways to do it in district that don't require a tremendous amount of work, I just wonder if there's kind of an 80-20 thing we can do, because the material is important and getting kids to have these conversations is important. It's important for signaling too, so that they understand that these are important conversations. Again, even if we can't fully design everything between now and then.
So can I make a suggestion possibly? Maybe we can ask staff to think and look into this for the next month and come back with some sort of thoughts of what you can do, what is possible, what isn't, the cost, so that we know what it is. Because this may be much simpler than everybody's thinking. We may be making it too much of a molehill, especially if Leslie says she never heard any feedback on it, then it must have run smoothly, because if something's negative, you hear it right away. So that would be my suggestion. And that way we don't drop it. But obviously right now on the spot, you can't assure us of anything at this moment.
What if we took the next month and a half to get the teacher feedback? And then we could get feedback around just, where people are in terms of implementing and their knowledge of the program, what supports people would need to run it, some of the questions that were raised today, try to get teacher feedback around those questions. Would that work for this team? Okay.
I would also suggest, if I can, to talk with that coordinator who was there, because I think that person having the hands-on experience could suggest ways to maybe implement that wouldn't be as difficult, or, what is important to implement and what we can wait to implement.
Mhm.
Yeah, I suspect that there's a possibility. We were running in fourth grade as a parent volunteer, having gone in and helped to do it when my kids were in fourth grade. I think we were doing like all the units in fourth grade. It was like a week. It was like, or once a week for a series of weeks. So I could see how that could be intense, and maybe we entertain a possibility that we only run a few units. Or something that's manageable, because the format right now, like the way that I have had recent experience in running it, is there are no coordination of parent volunteers, because it's just the educator running it. And I kind of had the feeling that the person coordinating was also managing a lot of those parents and the volunteers, because you're running for each session, you have 3 rooms. So you have 2 to 3 parents per room. So it's just a lot of people to manage. And that layer is sort of, because of COVID and the way that it's been changed, and is a little bit more virtual, and the speakers not coming into the building, there are less people to manage. So it may be less labor intensive than we think. So I think that's a great idea, getting some feedback from educators and people running it. And maybe we can just do a quick check-in and get like an update at the next meeting or meeting after, and just sort of see. I just don't want to miss, do other people have thoughts about that? I just don't want to miss the opportunity before the budget closes for the year.
Well, and I hate to be digging into Leslie's budget, but there is a budget for OTL that, something might be able to be applied to this, or we could get a grant from the Education Foundation or somewhere to get the money, because it's not a lot of money. There's time.
I'm less worried about the money. I think the money, that's the easy part. It's more about ensuring that we can run the program efficiently and effectively, and that anyone who needs access has the supports that they need. And then it's also about time on learning. And, it's one more thing that we're fitting into the curriculum, which, into the school day, I should say. And I think it could very well be worth it. But I'm also very mindful, especially, I keep saying this, but I'm very mindful, especially with our K-5 teachers. Every time I approach them, I'm like, so how about this, guys? Just because they're doing so much, and there's so many changes on their plate. And so I think that getting feedback from teachers is a great place to start, because they're going to tell us. They're going to tell us what they're able to do, what they need, and then we'll go from there. And I think with the committee's support, even around maybe running the program in some kind of a bridged way, or not doing all the units, but particular units that might be more impactful for our district, that could be a way to go. So let us get some feedback, and I think we bring it back to this group maybe for let's say April, for the May meeting, because then we could have June and July to get our acts together for SY 22-23. Does that work?
I think that sounds great. And I think just sort of pulling out, if there are other places that we do SEL work, or, middle grade, upper elementary assemblies, like there are other ways and places that might be pockets of time that don't necessarily need to shove it in, just as you said, Leslie, that we might be able to utilize. So I love the idea of just trying to think creatively. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Not seeing any other hands, any other comments. So it sounds great. So I think I'm excited. I think getting the teacher feedback will give us a lot of information, or give you all a lot of information. That's great. So we'll plan to talk again in May and do like a shorter update and just sort of see where things rolled out. Does that sound amenable to everybody? Okay, great. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for coming, Casey, and presenting and talking with us. Thank you so much. Not seeing any other questions. I think we're ready to move on to social studies. Does that sound right? So let's see, I believe that it's a K-8 focus for right now. So I think Greg Porter is our social studies coordinator for K-8. If I got the title right, Mr. Porter, I hope I did. So he's going to be presenting, and Gary Schiffman is here also with us, the high school coordinator for social studies, our department chair. And so we look forward to hearing about the current state of social studies and where we're going. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me just make sure my screen share.
While you're getting your screen together, if I could just jump in and say, one of the things that I think has been a real opportunity for us is to, one, have Greg come into the role who's been a social studies teacher in the district. So the perspective that he brings is one of theory and practice. So that's incredibly helpful. But there are not many times where you get to work almost every day with the person who was in the position prior. And so we have Gabe, who's really able to offer a lot of relevant support. And then Gary also. Gary has been just really thoughtful about the transition from middle school to high school. And I know that Greg and Gary have a really good working collaborative relationships. I think that has really set us up for success, especially as Greg is coming on new in the role. So, and he's doing an amazing job. So I just got to put that out there.
I just want to shout out that Greg has elementary experience and middle school experience, which is particularly relevant for the K-8 role.
Wow, that's quite the introduction. Thank you so much. Well, thank you again, everyone, for having me today. And again, as Leslie and Gabe said, prior to being in this interim position, I was a fifth grade teacher, sixth, seventh grade social studies teacher. And so, I certainly come to the role with that lens, still as my primary one. But what I hope to do today is to sort of give you, sort of some perspective on what I've been doing early in the new role, and sort of where, what I've learned and where we're headed. Make sure my slides work here. So really quickly, the objectives that I'd like to work through today is obviously, as I said, describe some of the early work I've done in the role that sort of framed my thinking, outline the current status of sort of the K-8 experience, and then dive a little bit more deeply into K2, 3, 5, and 6, 8 as grade bands. I'd like to then frame the goals that I have for the department based on what I've learned, and then detail some action steps that I see as necessary to address sort of the goals and the needs of the department. And then obviously, certainly we'll have some time at the end for some questions about the presentation, some links that might be useful to you, and things like that. So we'll start with sort of the early work here. So to start, I wanted to connect with teachers. That was a message I received from Leslie right from the start, and I took it to heart. And so I spent times in schools with teachers in classrooms. I met with teams, received feedback on sort of their current take on their social studies instruction for their respective grade levels. And I found this time incredibly valuable and informative. We have a group of teachers that are clearly devoted to strong social studies instruction. And that's, again, having worked with the 6-8 team, I sort of knew what we had, and having some connections at the elementary level in my previous experiences, but really diving in with the K-5 folks, they really want to be excellent social studies teachers. I did an informal review of the current curriculum and curricular materials that teachers have accessible to them. And so I want to take a moment just for the sake of this, for this presentation, to sort of clarify what I mean by curriculum and curricular materials. So curriculum in the context of this presentation is going to refer to sort of the sequence of student learning experiences, right? Teachers facilitate these learning experiences using curricular materials. And so curricular materials are sort of those resources that are used for and during instruction, okay? So I've worked with OTL and other coordinators to provide some updated instructional guidance for the current school year as we sort of navigate, again, this COVID world that we're still living in. I coupled this with access to some optional additional instructional materials, the goal of which was to provide teachers and students with some flexibility and the options they were seeking, right? A lot of what I heard early on is that the materials in front of teachers weren't meeting their needs. And so I wanted to provide some options to better meet those needs in the moment, right? As much as I want to do a thorough job, as again, a former teacher, the kids are coming at 8 o'clock one way or the other. And so having access to some things that are solid was critical at that early stage of the year. So I also spent time on our current budget and materials sort of status in social studies, and made some choices that I felt were the right ones to sort of improve the current status of the department, as well as set up some flexibility for the future. If this year was going to be around really a lot of learning, and then some eventual, now we'll get into some action, I wanted to have financial flexibility for the department. I also, in order to sort of better understand this role, participated in professional learning sort of regarding the broader social studies landscape. So one example was actually Gary and myself participated in the Melrose Public Schools Social Studies Program Review. And I learned a lot, seeing their sort of soup to nuts process of looking at their K-12 experience. I also participate in regular DESE organized meetings with other social studies coordinators across the district, or across the state, excuse me. And that really has proved incredibly valuable to understanding, what's on the mind of social studies folks across the state, and specifically around how to deliver strong, effective social studies instruction. And so related to that, those DESE meetings, it also sort of focused my attention on K2. Folks across the state are struggling to find strong social studies material for elementary, and particularly lower elementary. And so, as you can see here, that led me to a much more formal review of the K2 curriculum and curricular materials. All right, so I'll dive in now to a little bit of the sort of the current status of, again, both sort of the overarching K-8 experience as well as the grade bands. So in framing sort of this slide, you can sort of see I've grouped my learnings into 4 categories, those being curriculum, curricular materials, pedagogy, and professional development. So these categories, you're going to see them again later in both the goals and action steps for the department. And before I dive into some of the detail, I should also note that some of what I share with you may not sound new, in that I know that Gabe did present to school committee last year. And so some of these challenges are going to sound familiar to you. So I'm going to start with curriculum. The K-5 essential curriculum scope and sequences, which I know you've seen it and are aware of, created by OTL, can be extremely helpful in determining areas for interdisciplinary work throughout the school year. If we can couple that with an effective and intentional professional development structure, this tool could be a really highly leveraged tool for K-5 teachers. That said, sort of when examining that full landscape of K-8, the curriculum that's in place is largely incomplete. What exists can be disorganized and unclear, and that leads to inequitable experiences across the district. So one example, in a grade 1 civics unit, there's a sequence of lessons that are referred to, and this is a quote, as suggested activities, with each activity having possible guiding questions. And so I use this example not as a condemnation or a commentary on the quality of the activities or the quality of the questions. It's that their inclusion illustrates a lack of intentionality, right? Choices, while they're incredibly valuable to students, right? We know voice and choice is a really important part of our practice. It can lead, in this case, to incredible inconsistencies and inequities in instructional practice. And then also of note in the current curriculum is that in many cases, in many cases, there are not references, or at least limited references, to either supports or extensions for students. So when I say supports, we could talk about special education, our English learners. They're just not there. And where they are, again, fall in this sort of optional palette of choices. So continuing this thread, I'm going to shift to curricular materials. It is clear, as I did mention before, that teachers have, they are invested in strong social studies instruction. And so they've created and shared an incredible quantity of materials. And I see Gabe smiling because he knows what I'm talking about. Some of which is really well constructed and in depth. It does exist in some places. However, the variety of quality and quantity is substantial. And what we're left with, again, is largely incomplete, disorganized, and inequitable set of district-wide curricular materials. And in some cases, these are not aligned in any way, some of them, to the most recent Massachusetts framework. And again, what I think about is that brand new teacher or new to Brookline teacher. I don't have a way to say, this is what we teach, go teach. It just doesn't exist. In terms of pedagogy and instructional practices, there are a number of factors that are affecting the quality of instruction here in Brookline. And we've heard this, inconsistent time on learning. It's a huge challenge. Building to building, grade to grade, class to class. And again, this furthers the inequities that I've already spoken to. And then on top of that, you've got inconsistent and under-supported instructional practices across grade levels, in large part to the fact that these practices evolve over time. And so if those practices are not supported by your curriculum or your curricular materials or your PD, you're going to again have teachers who are struggling to teach as effectively as they'd like to. And lastly, professional development. Teachers are motivated, right? As I said, and it's clear they want to improve. They want access to high quality materials. They want pedagogical support. And there is no clear system for delivering quality professional development at this time, at least that I can see. I have no designated time to work on social studies with K-5 teachers. And as a department of one, respectfully, supporting all grades, I have limited capacity to support teachers in this sort of ad hoc manner. I mean, what that leaves us with is a large number of highly motivated teachers who we are unable to help improve their social studies practice. So again, we'll sort of dive into the different grade bands. And I know there's a lot on here, and so I won't read every bullet, I promise. I'll try to synthesize and look at trends. To begin, as I mentioned before, I really enjoy working with the K2 folks. If you've never sat on like the carpet in a first grade classroom where social studies takes place, like it's a trip, Again, sorry to be casual, but like as a middle school guy, like it is wild and it is so wonderful to watch these teachers in action. It's an art form that I don't have that ability, but it's amazing to see it in action, and then it motivates me to want to support, right? So in terms of K2, there are some really clear trends to note. First of which is that in all three grade levels, teachers are really focused on incorporating the lives of their students and families into their classrooms. There's a strong focus on having students engage with the community around them, sort of starting in their classroom, expanding to the school level, and even into the broader community. And in kindergarten, it's important to note that despite some of the challenges that exist, they do have units that are connected to state frameworks, which is a strong start. Again, the flip side to this coin, though, is that through the informal review that I did earlier in the year, and then a more formal review of the current curriculum and curricular materials, there is a lot to do. The materials, again, as I mentioned, are incomplete, in many cases not aligned at all, and really don't meet the expectations for strong social studies instruction. And so on top of that, I would see a full review and revision of the Brookline learning expectations for these grade levels as something that's of high priority. So for grade 3 to 5, again, a similar sort of framework. In grade 3, teachers and students, in terms of some strengths, now have access to a core textbook entitled Massachusetts, Our Home. It's the most recent edition of a book that we've had in Brookline now for a number of years. The purchase of this book was started under Gabe, and then as I've sort of seen it through to deliver it to all the different third grade teachers. And really what's important to note about this most recent edition is the publishers were really focused on really intentionally centering voices of those who have been underrepresented in sort of the historical story connected to third grade. In addition, within third grade, there's a group of educators who are working to partner with the Hidden Brookline group to create a strong and complete unit of study with the purpose of teaching and learning the history of enslavement as it pertains to the Brookline community. And I know that Hidden Brookline had been a part of third grade in the past. And again, not sure exactly how and when and where it fell off. But what I'm really excited about is a new group of teachers with a fresh set of eyes, looking to see how and where it can fit. In grade 4, there are some strong foundational units on immigration and Indigenous people that are at various stages of implementation, but that really reflect a strong sort of grade 4 focus on accurate and representative history. There's also a group of 4th grade teachers that are working on a BEF grant connected to integrating social justice into the 4th grade experience more intentionally. And I'm really excited to sort of partner with them and see how their work has developed and to see how it can, continue forward. In grade 5, the 5th grade folks at Lincoln are involved in a pilot of DESE created curriculum and curricular materials. And the early returns are quite good. Teachers report that the materials are easy to use, accessible to students, and that one of their biggest problems is time, and not maybe in the way that I've already mentioned it, but in terms of time allotments or time on learning, but that their lessons run long because the kids want to keep talking, right? And that's their words, not mine. And then I had the opportunity to do some walkthroughs with some folks from DESE and observe some lessons, and it's really good stuff. And so that's really exciting. And so connected to this is my hope that we might get some early access. So it's a 2-year pilot with half the curriculum this year and half next year. And I'm continually chirping in the ears of folks that will listen to see if we can get some early access to sort of, consider a soft opening of sorts and put some of this in front of teachers as early as next year. And again, it's my hope that these new materials could sort of help with those feelings of like overwhelmed 5th grade teachers who got a lot sort of dropped on their plate, respectfully, with the 2018 framework. And I know the DESE folks are considering all of that as they've designed these units. And then as far as challenges, that sort of the trend sadly continues of sort of incomplete curriculum and curricular materials. A lack of PD time and structure has made the use of the grade 3 textbook and a grade 5 textbook that was also purchased. It's been really challenging to help sort of folks see how that tool can be useful in their classroom. And again, a need to review and revise the learning expectations at all 3 grade levels exists. And lastly, 6-8. To start, there is some overlap you're going to see within the 6-7 courses, in that a shift to the 2018 framework began pre-COVID. And so the 6-7 courses have a lot closer alignment than say the 8th grade, and I'll get to that in a moment. Some really exciting team-based work that's being done this year in the 6-8 team. In grade 6, there's a really exciting new writing unit that's being designed. In 7th grade, the folks had been really wanting a more intentional and functional sort of tool or series of tools for linking current events, teaching current events, as well as linking current events to the regions of the world that they are studying. So if they're working in East Asia, sort of at a historical level or an ancient level, what also is happening now in that part of the world? And I thought that was a really clever thought, and they're doing some really thoughtful design. And then in grade 8, as far as project work, their brains are fully trained on the Civic Action Project and sort of piloting a project this year. Just to add a little bit more detail, that DESE pilot I mentioned earlier is also happening in the 7th grade. The folks also happen to be from Lincoln. I will say that they may not be as enthusiastic as the grade 5 folks about the materials they're using this year, but they have been really reflective, thoughtful. They've been collaborative with the DESE people. And again, I think they've done some really solid work trying to sort of navigate these tools that they've struggled with more so, I would say, than 5th grade in terms of its sort of readiness. And it's important to note that even though we don't have a group piloting, there are 6th grade materials that are also being piloted across the state. And similarly, I am again chirping in ears to see if we can get access to some of those units ahead of time, again, to put in front of teachers to say, hey, are these things we should consider, moving forward.
Just want to jump in really quickly. And for full disclosure, I'm actually working on that DESE grant to develop the curriculum. But it's being written primarily by folks at Primary Source. They're the core designers. Desi is overseeing the project.
Thanks, Gabe. Appreciate it. And then I just want to say a little bit more about grade 8. The teachers are, as I've noted here on the slide, sort of working with what I'm calling a sort of a hybrid course. It's still, again, because of the timing of the COVID pandemic, they never really were able to sort of see a shift all the way through. So it's really right now a combination, sort of the old US history course and this new civic standards in sort of an integrated way. And so again, the teachers are really committed to creating a course of value moving forward. And we're really going to take on that work this summer. Teachers are interested in reviewing also the practice materials that are now public, connected with the 8th grade social studies MCAS pilot. And so we're going to also, examine the components of that, the pilot test and how that, should or should not play a part of our sort of course design moving forward. And then also, again, the challenges in 6-8 are going to sound a little bit familiar. I would say the 6-8 team overall is a little further along, but again, there are incomplete sets of materials. And as I noted on here, some specific areas of need within specific units at various grade levels. And again, a full review of and consideration for revision of the learning expectations exists here as well. I also noted here, the 8th grade teachers are really thoughtfully thinking about the civic action project and sort of where it lives or where it should be housed. And so there are multiple models happening in different places. We've got teachers that are integrating it through advisory. We've got teachers that are doing it solely in social studies, others that are doing it as a social studies ELA sort of collaboration. So I'm really interested to get that sort of data to come back to OTL and say, listen, there's some really exciting options here. And so I'm again, like I said, I'm really excited to see what comes from the sort of pilot this year. All right, so, okay, deep breath. I actually put myself a note here. Take a deep breath here, Greg. You've been talking for a bit. All right, see, gotta get a couple laughs there. All right, I'm still used to being, in front of the class. Sorry. All right, so goals, as you can see, they're still organized within those four categories. Diving into curriculum. Alignment to the 2018 frameworks in terms of the curriculum and practice is a high priority. We need to update our learning expectations, update along with that our progress reports so they're actually reflective of what we are actually teaching and want to be teaching in these respective grade levels. Curriculum really needs to meet a high standard. I have really high expectations for teachers, and so in order to have those, I need to be able to put really high high quality materials in terms of its usability, accessibility, consistency, sustainability, right? Beyond just the day I hand something across the table, and equity. And it has to have supports and challenge, supports for students as well as embedded challenges, right? There needs to be opportunities for all students to feel supported and all students to be challenged. In terms of curricular materials, the PSB should have a complete and comprehensive set of materials. I feel like that's a simple sentence, but it's not quite so simple. These materials need to reflect stakeholder values within PSB and be representative and reflective of our students and our families. So when thinking about what we're putting in front of people, there are multiple lenses that I need people to look at it through. And so I'm actively seeking out voices of different stakeholders to give me feedback on the direction that we're headed in. Excuse me, I lost my train of thought. Oh, excuse me. And in terms of the materials as well, how can we help students to sort of see themselves in what they're learning, see their experiences in their work, and really sort of provide these authentic learning opportunities. That again, I mean, if you've ever been in a classroom and you see kids that are actively engaged in what they're doing, like we can have that all of the time, but it comes from having a really clear path, and that's what I want to provide. Pedagogically speaking, instructional practices and techniques have to be embedded. So embedded in curriculum and curricular materials. We need to support teachers as they build best practices into their courses, including culturally responsive pedagogy. We need to support teachers as they build their capacity and confidence and skill in leading courageous conversations. Right? Difficult conversations are happening in social studies classes every day. And we need to have teachers that are willing to lean into those conversations and feel confident, in their ability to lean in and lead those conversations. And we must have consistent time on learning across the schools. Lastly, professional development, multifaceted. It has to support curriculum and pedagogy. They need upfront training when new materials are put in front of them, and ongoing training to sort of support their growth in learning new curriculum. That is only possible through a really designated and clear PD structure. I mean, from my seat, all of this is significantly more possible with an increase in district staffing in the social studies department, as well as providing other teacher leadership opportunities, which I have some ideas about. Okay, almost there. Sorry. Last one, action steps. And again, I'm going to say before I dive into this, that Gary gave me some really good feedback on this and said, Greg, there's a lot on this slide. And I said, I know, and I'm going to leave it there. And then we can talk about, 24-hour workdays. So again, I'll start curriculum one last time. My immediate focus is on K2 and conducting an external materials review to vet options for curriculum and curricular materials moving forward. A revision of our course overviews for K8 is critical so that students and families accurately know what to expect at their respective grade levels. A revision of all the K8 learning expectations is a priority so that teachers know sort of what the portrait of a third grader, for example, actually is. And lastly, I'm really excited about some of the summer workshops that people are thinking about and talking to me about. And if possible, really to address a lot of the areas of need that I've mentioned today. For materials, I'd like to replicate the internal materials review process that I conducted for K2 in both 3.5 and 6.8, so that we can more specifically understand the needs of these grade bands moving forward, which may or may not lead to, again, vetting external options or external materials for potential use. For pedagogy, again, a revision of the sort of social studies department vision, mission, and goals is in order to accurately communicate what it is we value in our social studies instruction. And I'll work with OTL to create or find some way to create consistent time on learning for social studies, as well as look at mechanisms by which to more specifically examine and address pedagogical practices in our elementary social studies teachers. And then as far as PD, it's really two specific areas: creative solutions to the staffing issue that I mentioned a moment ago. And again, how to create more predictable, accessible, and sustainable PD structures so that teachers can receive the training that they really need to grow their practice. And again, I know there's a lot on that slide, but this is what I love to do. This is the work that I'm really excited to do, and I'm really glad that I get to be a part of it. So that was a mouthful, I know. I can pause there. Stop there. I can stop sharing my screen. Just, again, not that you can't find these things, but I just thought the 2018 framework here, the practice standards, and then the C3 framework, which again gives some really high level or higher level thinking, could be useful. So I put those in here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Porter. Do members of the subcommittee have questions? That was a lot to digest, and
Yes.
No, that which is good, and you will take us some time, and we'll probably think of questions later. I do have a couple, but if anyone else, I tend to go first a lot, so I thought I would offer it up to other people before I start talking. Seeing no hands, I'm going to jump in. All right, so great. So it sounds like a real priority is aligning the learning expectations to the 2018 frameworks. Is that right? And are you thinking, it sounded like you were going to focus on K2 first and maybe then work your way up? Or is that generally a fair restatement of what you were talking about? Or
yeah, I mean, the first piece about alignment of learning expectations to frameworks, I mean, even Leslie and Michelle can certainly speak to this, but what I would say is I have I guess, a different set of thoughts around learning expectations. I don't know that they need to be sort of like, I guess I want to say bullet points or curricular points on a page. I use that phrase portrait of a third grader intentionally because I wonder about sort of the structure of our learning expectations. If curriculum is one thing, maybe learning expectations can be a reflection of something else. In terms of curriculum and curricular materials, closer alignment to those frameworks is definitely a priority. And yes, your explanation of sort of starting with K2 and working our way up is a fair judgment of sort of the way I'm going to progress. In large part because that's sort of if I was to prioritize the severity of need, that's the order in which I would prioritize it.
Oh, that's great. So would you mind saying maybe just a couple more sentences about what you mean about learning expectations? As someone who loves to talk curriculum and hear other people's ideas, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I remember being a fifth grade teacher, and you're trying to take in all this different information, and I remember seeing, the printed book of Massachusetts frameworks, and I remember seeing these printed Brookline learning expectations, and at least in social studies for grade 5 at that time, they were really dense. There was a lot of content embedded in there. And I remember going to my colleague, you might remember the name Mary Sedano, and walking in there and saying, which of these am I supposed to teach? And I know that's sort of casual, and at the same time, I think it's reflective of what a lot of teachers still are wondering about. And so if something is in our learning expectations that's not in the framework, what do teachers do? And vice versa. And so I guess I'm really curious about, again, and Gabe and I sort of geek out on this around sort of the skills and dispositions of social studies students. And so I would love to be in a conversation with people about, we're in this unique opportunity with being this just about, hopefully knock on wood, out of COVID stage. And, is this an opportunity to reinvent or rethink a longstanding system in Brookline to improve?
And I think a key piece for social studies that the 2018 frameworks really help with is that this is the first time in Massachusetts that the state has indicated social studies practices the same way we have math practices or science practices. That did not exist in the previous framework. So the only thing we had to work on was like, do kids know who the first 3 presidents are? Or can they identify like what the symbols in the US flag is? Now we can track pre-K through 12. We can track students' source analysis, students' ability to advocate for change, students' ability to weigh evidence and find research. Like those skills are embedded all the way pre-K through 12. And Greg referred to them pretty quickly, but the C3 standards, which come from the National Council for Social Studies, are skill-based and actually provide benchmarks based on grade level bands. And so we have much more available material to talk about the skills that spiral through social studies every year so that we can consistently report out to students and also to families about actual progress. Whereas, have I memorized presidents or do I know the names of the countries can be certainly relevant, but it's not terribly compelling.
And just to add on, the sort of skills and dispositions that Gabe and I are talking about, and knowing that there are practice skills in these other subject areas, when I think again of that portrait of a third grader, there's certainly overlap, right? There's overlap across math, science, social studies, ELA, and so forth. And so again, if we want to shift things toward a more interdisciplinary approach, which I think is really the right way forward, again, showing teachers where the overlap is, you could be working on skills that are very much related to social studies during your science class, and that's great, right? And so it helps teachers sort of, this is not a real phrase, unsilo the subjects, right? I don't know how else to put that. And again, think about them in a more holistic way. So that's sort of what, again, but I'd love to continue the conversation. This is the kind of stuff I love to do.
Yeah, and I think the committee, I don't want to speak for the committee, I'm one voice, but we've had a number of conversations about more interdisciplinary learning. We've talked a number of times about like college and career readiness skills, which I kind of feeling like the C3 may be in alignment with that: critical thinking, problem solving, source analysis, research skills, all of those kinds of things. And then again, civic engagement and students as agents of change and things like that are like really right my sort of my cup of tea. So I think those are really great. And if we are doing the work of really examining, I think one, we need to, we've talked about this with a number of content areas coming to do presentations, making sure that the frameworks match what we are actually doing, that the right units are at the right grade levels and that things are at the, are age appropriate and all of that good stuff and inclusive and equitable, all of these really good things. But so it'll be interesting to see as your work progresses. Do you have like a timeline of like knowing it's right now a one person office? And I hear you about that, but like what might be a possible timeline for the breadth of this work? And I'll have two other things and I'll stop talking. You can respond to what you're able to. Are there opportunities for cross-district or across district grade alike planning? So like district-wide 7th grade teachers or 8th grade teachers, are there opportunities at all for them to do that over the course of the year? And then I'd love for us to talk at some point, and maybe today's not the day, about where where civic action projects live, period, in our curriculum. And is it just an 8th grade thing? And, I mean, I think there's certainly a level of like sophistication as you get older and your ability to truly design and engage in those actions. But I don't know, that would be, I'd love to hear more about that as your work continues and you get feedback, to hear more about what that looks like and where it can live. And anyways, that's all. I'm gonna stop.
That's okay. So I think I got timeline, cross-district work, and civic action K-8. As far as the timeline, my timeline with K2 is a little more firm because I've done sort of I've already done the internal review. And so we are shifting toward an external review. I'm actually meeting with K2 folks on Thursday of this week to give them a very specific K2 update and sort of our course of action forward. I'm looking to do a limited pilot as early as this spring of some options, whittle them down, and a full pilot in some limited areas through all of next year, with the thought that even, so that would be 22-3, so as early as 3-4, we could be putting things in front of K2 across Brookline. And then 3-5, again, I'd like to, if I can get some support, I'd like to get that internal review finished, because basically as soon as the internal materials review is finished at 3-4, because again, with 5, I'm going to sort of hold the line on the DESI materials, because again, just because of what I've been hearing and seeing, there's a bit of a roadmap, right? So I sort of built a model for K2 of internal review, external review, pilot, and so forth, that I could then repeat with 3-4. So I could conceivably next year do a limited pilot in 3-4, following year a full pilot, right? So I could stagger it across, year to year. I know I'm also working with all the other coordinators so that we're not overtaxing any specific grade level. So we're really thinking in an integrated way about what's rolling out in math, ELA, science. And so, there aren't, 4 subject areas changing at the same time, because there will be a mutiny, respectfully. Cross-district work 6, 7, 8 does take place, though. I mentioned I don't have designated K5 time, but I do have designated 6, 8 time. And so there is that cross-district work and built into the schedule. And then civic action across the grade levels. I mean, K2, they're in the framework. There is a full unit or standard, designated to civics. And again, civics at kindergarten, civics at grade 1. And there are certainly opportunities for embedding it across the other grade levels. So while the project, like you said, is that more formalized piece, that your phrasing around agents of change, like that swirls in my head all day long. And so, looking for opportunities to embed that across K8 that's right up my alley as well.
Just want to build one little piece, right? I think the distinction that Greg's talking about for the 8th grade civic action project, that's the law. So there's a specific law, and there's also a high school civic action project that Gary's working with that team on. I think it'll be placed in 11th grade in the US history context. There is one of the practices, right, and this is part of why the alignment is so relevant. One of the practices is about taking informed action. It's at every grade level, pre-K through 12.
Thank you both, Helen, and then I saw Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg, for this report and your enthusiasm about your topic. It makes everybody enthusiastic. I had a few questions.
Sure.
One is a quick one, but if the state frameworks are pre-K through 8, why are we just doing K through 2?
Do you want me to go with you one at a time, or do you want to do all your questions?
As you wish. I mean, maybe
Yeah,
I
no,
said-
yeah, absolutely. No, I don't mind going one at a time. That's totally fine. Full transparency. It's a challenge that Gabe communicated to me as we did some transition and more thoughtful work with pre-K. It hasn't been within my capacity to work with pre-K at this stage, but it's certainly one of the things that I want to think about too is as I'm intentionally getting people at the table to look at these materials moving forward. That intentionality includes some pre-K folks. So, as I sort of offer it up to folks in terms of a pilot, I want folks from pre-K to be a part of that conversation to sort of see and learn about these materials, sort of see what may or may not resonate or be appropriate for pre-K as far as social studies instruction, but it just hasn't been within my sort of early stage of capacity.
Okay, no, that's good. And that sort of leads me, I'm not clear
Actually,
what you
Helen,
mean by, I'm
Can I
sorry?
pause you real quick? Because I think you asked about pre-K to 8. One of the things Greg has built on is Jeff, as he was leaving, and then for myself, we prioritized middle school and getting middle school on the track. So some of that work has already happened, and middle school is reasonably close to being aligned.
Right. No, I remember the presentations we've had. I remember actually a very good presentation on 4th grade interdisciplinary presentation with science and social studies. I can't remember what the subject was that they were using, but the curriculum coordinators had found a way to do that in some subject, some of their units that they were doing. And I'm hoping that that's happening more and more because I think that that's the way you get around some of these time issues. Spending time in social studies in a silo is not going to get you your math time or your English time. But if you can do it all together, as I think we've all been talking about.
Yeah, 100%. But Emily Speck and I she's done quite a bit of that type of work when she was in her previous district. She was in Cambridge.
Right.
And she's got a lot of really good ideas about how we can do that at the elementary level. And I've also done, met with Joanna in ELA, and we have some plans for me to sit in on some of the PD she runs for her ELA, coaches and specialists on the nonfiction units, because again, if I'm, looking at curricular options moving forward, I want it to integrate, right? I don't want to select a program that teaches literacy or teaches, say argument writing in a polar opposite way of the current programs here in Brookline. And the only way I'm going to understand that is to learn it myself. So
and maybe she can use some of your subject matters as what to write about. So
exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay, I'm done.
Helen, could I just jump in and say, really the first step around the curriculum integration is the scope and sequence. And so that's why one of the reasons we were really excited to get that off the ground. And then moving forward from that, being really intentional about how we're going to integrate the work, making sure the curriculums align, making sure the timing aligns, making sure that when children need to be taught discrete skills that maybe can't be integrated, that we teach it the way it needs to be taught, but then integrate where we can. So it's all these kind of little building blocks that I hope will get us to that place.
All right. And just one more, can I say one more question? Jennifer, I know I've been sort of hogging it. But so we used to teach facing history in 8th grade. Do we teach it?
So are you specifically referring to the Facing History unit on the Holocaust?
Yes, and the way that they put it together. Yes, it was I think a 2-month session in 8th grade.
Yeah. So,
And wait a minute, maybe together with that, tell me how, because I know there's a law on teaching the genocide that also came up. So maybe you can talk about both.
absolutely. And again, I know Gary had his hand up, so he may have wanted to jump in, or he may have had to go.
Oh,
That's okay. No, I think he may have had a little bit of input on this, but I'm happy to speak to it as much as I can. And then Gabe, obviously jump in if you feel like there's more. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start with so materials from the Facing History unit are still in place in grade 8 in that sort of hybrid US history civics course that's being taught. The full unit, as it is fully constructed, is not in place in grade 8, and in part because if you look at the new 8th grade framework, it doesn't live there anymore, respectfully. What I would say, though, as far as the Genocide Education Bill, being in these DESE calls, they are sort of keeping us coordinators up to date on what their plans are. So they are mandated to create materials connected to supporting sort of the teaching and learning around the Genocide Education Bill, but they're not beginning that work until this spring. And so really where we're leaning into it is the fact that opportunities to teach to this topic are embedded at multiple areas across the curriculum. So, so currently the Holocaust in grade 8, and I know there are some courses, and since Gary isn't here, maybe Gabe can speak to high school courses. But when you're looking at 7th grade, there's a unit on Australia and sort of the European colonization in Australia and the Aboriginal people in Australia. In grade 6, there's the European colonization in the Americas. In 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, we know North America and the indigenous people in North America. And so really, to me, sort of thinking about that topic in multiple settings and multiple sort of historical contexts across the K-8 experience is the way that's really going to manifest itself over time. And then also looking at, what DESE does put together as far as materials are concerned. But that's sort of, I guess, and Gabe, I don't know if you wanted to add more to it.
Yeah. So regarding genocide, I'll kind of go backwards on where Greg was. The Holocaust specifically, and then other sort of 20th century genocides, to use a crude organizational tool, really show up in 10th grade and modern world history in terms of the frameworks and in terms of our course. It's when they can be contextualized. Teaching the Holocaust in the context of World War II makes a lot more sense. And so in terms of like this situation right now, right, I think Greg described it well. But in addition to the specific materials from like the Holocaust and Human Behavior unit from Facing History, at the beginning of the year, as far as I know, every 8th grade teacher uses materials from Facing History about perspective taking and about understanding the concepts that, history is made by people making choices, and uses that to frame work on identity at the beginning of the year. And then that work also shows up again as kind of the unit that needs a better title, but sort of the long civil rights unit is a way to think about it, kind of Civil War to the 1960s. That framing and that approach is represented in that work. And Facing History themselves have expanded and taken similar approaches into examinations of like school integration and a variety of other kind of US focused topics.
And I would say, one of the things that the 8th grade teachers have been really reflective about as we think about sort of this shift or this new course that we're going to design is exactly what we're talking about, which is sort of, if we don't teach it here, where is it taught? Is it taught? And I appreciate their concern that if we let it go, where will it live? And so, as we talk about, doing an internal review of material and curriculum, we certainly are going to come across the process of, what are these external options? And it may be that Facing History comes in a different, more intentional way. But we're
I
just not
guess the
there.
thing I worry about is, when I was growing up in the last century, and took US history in a school where probably 20% of the kids were children of Holocaust survivors. We had one day where we talked about it in 10th grade during US history. And I worry that that's going to get lost. That there's so much from the Second World War till today, that it's too much to cover. So I guess I'm concerned about it.
And I would say, if any of the 8th grade teachers were here, that they 100% share your concern. And so, again, as we get into the work this
And
summer.
especially since, I'm sorry.
No. Please.
It was developed here in Brookline at the Runkle School. We have strong ties there. They're right here down across the street from Town Hall. We should use them. They have some incredible curriculum. So, no, I'm done. Thank you.
Stephen, did you want to?
Thanks. Yeah, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I've had to turn off my video because my internet died, so I'm on the phone now.
We can hear you. Yep.
All right. So first of all, thank you for that presentation. Just once again, I have to say, I just feel so confident about the direction that OTL is going. I feel like the curriculum coordinators are uniformly brilliant. And I just feel a tremendous amount of confidence that the sheer quantity of ideas that we're being presented, like there's no way I'm going to digest more than like a tenth of it right now. And I'm saying that because it's true, but also because I find myself frustrated and confused by this conversation. And that's not because of anything you said, Greg. It's because it just underscores to me the sheer importance of social studies in our curriculum. And I know the curriculum subcommittee has heard me bang on about this before, but I have to reiterate that what confuses me now is I think I don't totally understand what we're doing on the curriculum subcommittee if we can't talk about this in the context of time on learning. If to my understanding is we're not going to micromanage you, Greg. You're clearly more than qualified to do what you do. And Helen, everything you said, I share your fascination 100%. I have a particular fascination with how genocide curricula are taught in general. I spent time in Rwanda researching how they prepared it. I would love nothing more than just to wonk out on this topic for the next 20 minutes. But we literally have 50% fewer minutes allotted to social studies than we did 6, 7, 8 years ago. And the richness of what you're presenting makes me want to advocate for the inclusion of social studies in our curriculum so that it's genuinely a robust curricular offering rather than what's become a narrowed curriculum. And so I guess what I want to do with this comment, Jen, is to put it to you and to Leslie to ask, in what context are we considering presentations like this? Is it for our edification? I mean, I would love to, Greg, in the future, be a much more informed representative of what we're doing in social studies in the district. I think that will be illuminating for some, but I also don't know to what extent I'm really doing anyone much of a service. I would prefer to direct them to you or to direct them to a recording of this. What seems to me material and important is to think through what's our policy when it comes to the inclusion of social studies in the curriculum as a standalone topic and as a topic that could be taught in a cross or interdisciplinary way, or as topics that could be taught in conjunction with other topics like literacy and numeracy. So thank you for allowing me the soapbox for a minute. I'm going to get off it now. I know you've all heard me say this a lot already, but it seemed to me worth repeating here.
So I'll jump in and then I'm going to let Leslie give a little bit longer. I think I understand your question, Stephen. So if I don't answer what you're looking for, I think, well, one, I know that Leslie's going to talk a little bit, or I think she's going to talk a little bit about time on learning during her goals and update. So I think we will get to that. And I think I stand on the soapbox with you in advocating for us to talk more about time on learning. So I do think it's important. At the same time, I think it's important that we know what we're doing in the schools right now so that we can get a better understanding of what's happening, what work is being done in order for us to understand and start to tackle that. And I also think OTL has needed some time to really think about how to work on time on learning, because there's a lot of pieces in that. And I also think we haven't put out like specific numbers right now, indicating to educators that they have to follow adherence to certain numbers of minutes within departments. At the same time, it would be, I think I would love to see us move to a place where people are, let me put it this way, I think curriculum coordinators are starting to really be able to engage in the work that's necessary for us to move in a more interdisciplinary way. And for us to say, even if we had a document that said, these are the time allocations, because I do think that it is a statement of the time on learning is a statement of our goals and intentions and what we do think is important, sort of like I don't know how else to put that, but it's a statement of our beliefs, like to put sort of structure and reinforcement behind what we think is important. So I think that OTL needs that time to do that work to really consider what it can look like. And that's my perspective. So I think my hope, and I think the district's hope is to, well, I don't know, I don't want to speak for the district, but my hope in these presentations is for us to all have a better understanding of what's happening in all of our departments and where the work is, so that we can all sort of start from a common place, because it's been a while since we've had these kinds of presentations to the curriculum subcommittee. I don't think we've sort of
Actually, Jennifer, thank you. That actually helps me think through this better. So thank you for
that. Am I
that.
answering the right question? I'm not even sure I am. I'm just giving you my opinions. So
I think you saying that we need to be able to have a deep understanding of the content if we're going to have any discussion about its place as a priority in the PSB curriculum. That makes a lot of sense to me. I guess I just struggle to take in a presentation like this without first having been able to enshrine in our actions that social studies and science has this place in a 21st century education curriculum. But I feel like what you said seems very, very fair to me. So thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, I'm going to let Leslie give her, from the district perspective. That's just my personal opinion. So go for it, Leslie.
Sure, I'll jump in. Stephen and Jen, I don't think you have to get off the soapbox, because that soapbox is the elephant in the room that everyone is talking about. So it's right to discuss it here. And so let me, before I go there, for me, one of the rationales for these presentations is for you all to know where we are and where we're going in terms of our curriculum. I think there's a lot of places where Brookline, the public schools of Brookline, are incredibly strong with curriculum. And there are some places where we're a little bit behind, and maybe sometimes not a little bit. And so my goal is to get all of the curriculums aligned to the standards and get them where they need to be as a baseline. So these are really baseline conversations, and to show you what we're working on and what we have in place. And I think there's a lot to be proud of. I also think there's quite a bit of work that we need to do. And so I wanted the coordinators to be really transparent with the curriculum subcommittee. And I know one of the things that's been really helpful is the whole process of presenting, having coordinators present to this group first before going to the larger committee, because then your questions are able to inform what they share more widely. And so we've all found that really helpful. And also to give you a sense of why we need the time on learning, why we have to make this right, why we have to get the time allocations right, is because we have all this content that needs to be delivered to children in a manageable and effective way. And so this gives you a sense of all the content that we have to offer, and why sometimes the time allocations are a struggle. What we're hoping to do with time allocations, and I think the role of this committee is for us to give you a really clear picture of where things are with time on learning. And so maybe I even just take a minute, handle this in the update, but just talk about it now. The time on learning is so complex because even within a school, within a grade, you can have variance at a grade. And so what we're doing now is we're working with the principals to collect information on time on learning that we can present to you all so that you know, how close are we to the needed times, and also how consistent are times across the district. So what I can tell you is that we'll have that information for you, I would say in May. I was hoping to get it to you earlier, but we just weren't in that place with this team being new and the COVID transitions. We just were dealing with a lot. But we're tackling this now with principals. And so actually at our last adaptive principal meeting, which was on Wednesday, we started the exercise of collecting time on learning across grades, across schools, across the district. And so very shortly, we'll have that information for you. And one of the things that was really interesting was just how much variance there is. That came out in the first meeting that we have, and why schools need to schedule the way they schedule. There are so many, like even I think about Pierce, right? Pierce has to schedule a particular way because kids are transitioning across a campus, really. And so those things matter and those things impact the schedule. But one of the other pieces, I feel like I'm saying a lot. So we want to get you that baseline information. And then I think the job of the committee is to help us think through how do we get standard time allocations? What are the things that we need to continue? What are the things that maybe we cannot continue? And I think that this committee is really formative in that conversation. I was going to say something else. Just totally left my mind. So I think another piece that's really going to get at this is that we are implementing a schedule review process with every school. And so it's going to be a cross-functional team of all of the central office departments. A school will come and meet with that cross-functional team, and we'll talk about the schedule. That will give us a better sense on what's the time on learning, what's the FTE that's dedicated to the teaching of that content, what are some of the barriers that schools are encountering. And so that will not only give us a better picture, but we'll be able to solve for some of these issues cross-functionally, right? Casey can jump in, Ty can jump in from HR where there's a need. And I hope that that will give us some more consistency across the board and just give us a better sense of where we are. And ultimately, Dr. Guillory and I talked about this process that we are it's going to be our inaugural year this year, that we actually do this process before the budget season next year, because it won't only help us look at schedules, it's going to help us get a better sense of FTE. And when we're talking about needs, we'll have a better sense of who's overscheduled, who's underscheduled. And that's going to have an impact not on just teaching and learning, but also on the budget. Is that helpful? I feel like I said a lot.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. And I also feel like what you said is very reflective of how Dr. Guillory talks about having a very deliberate approach to assessing PSB very thoroughly before making changes. I guess on this topic, I continue to think that we can be pursuing tracks in parallel. I think the assessment can go alongside, for instance, like a district statement acknowledging these cuts have been pretty severe, and acknowledging that that our vision of what public education means today also includes more science and social studies offerings than currently are offered, or something like that, rather than have it proceed in a completely linear fashion. But Leslie, everything you said makes complete sense to me, and it also seems extremely consistent with Dr. Guillory's vision. So thank you very much for that response.
Thank you, Stephen.
Helen and Susan, I'm not sure if you wanted to chime in on the social studies conversation as well, but I see Helen's hand.
I will cede my time to Susan first if she wants. I was actually going to respond to Leslie because I felt it seems to me, and maybe I don't get this right, but it seems to me there are two pieces to this scheduling time on learning. One has to do with the scheduling with the electives, not electives, but gym, art, world language, all those things. And then there's the part K through 4, probably, maybe 5. 5, I think, is a little different animal. K through 4, where there's English, social studies, math, and science. And how do we manage to, I mean, I wouldn't want to count hours if we're doing it in an integrated way. I would want it to be, this is all time on learning. Whereas I think what Stephen was referring to is where we said English language arts is an hour a day or whatever, I forget. So I see those, maybe I'm wrong, but I see them as two separate pieces. I think they go together, but they're two separate pieces. So maybe you can speak to
they
that.
are. They're not always connected, but sometimes they are. And so I think that schools are making choices based on different things happening in their buildings, and we have to really understand that.
Oh,
and then we also have the issue of, we have some curricula that's in place that requires a certain amount of time. And then when we really sit down to look at it across the board, across content, not all the contents fit. So we made, I'm not going to say errors, but we've taken on some things before making sure that it all fit together like this. And so now we're trying to go back and figure out, how do we make it fit like this?
okay.
And so that's, yeah.
Thank you.
Just one other short comment, which is along the lines of sort of interdisciplinary work, given how prominent anti-Semitism in particular is right now, and anti-bias more generally, anti-Asian hate, it does strike me, just on the facing history conversation, just like we had on the last conversation, which might be, Greg, why I was looking at you, is like, there are other places that this can go, and it doesn't only need to be sandwiched into social studies minutes. As we think about the high school in particular, different days of focus, but even in the other levels, social emotional learning places, like there are other places where this can, or all school assemblies or grade band assemblies that are age appropriate. So like this is one of those things, or even things like, when Ukraine happened, I know a number of teachers, in particular at the high school, but in the middle school also, sort of pushed aside their curriculum for the day and focused on that, and which is fantastic. So I guess all I would say is like there are ways to do things even when you don't have enough time, especially on social studies type things, or things that can be broadly tied to social emotional, or just life, right? Like just being a person in the world that we want you to be. So I guess I would just not think exclusively in the frame of the minutes, even though that's a super important conversation, and just make sure that there are other places where those conversations are happening, because when Ukraine, shows up, it's not necessarily in the right scope or sequence or at the right moment or at the right grade level that we were going to be teaching it in those 12 months. So anyway, what I love is that this also just speaks to the creativity of our teachers to be able to kind of think and prioritize and have that sense of kind of a whole child in mind. So yes, we have to get the schedule right, but it's just much more holistic. Or as we think about, current events, kinds of things at the middle school level, clubs, as we rethink middle school more broadly, whatever it is that, it's just a much more broad set of things that kids need. And there are a number of things that we've talked about here that fit into that kind of awareness of being a good person with character in the world. So anyway, thank you, Greg. Just excited you're working on this.
Thanks so much.
I just jump in on one thing that you were saying, Susan. I think it's beyond, where we struggle, and this is where the size of the school is dependent on this, that the size of the school impacts this as well, is I think it's where we're struggling is also beyond what we consider the 4 content areas. So we have a lot of creativity in Brookline, and we've made commitments to a lot of things. And we also have a significantly shorter school day than we need to do all of that. So I think when we talk about our commitments and what we want a student to look like at the end, we know what that is. But it's how do you get there? And then we also do have a state requirement for things, and we need to understand if we are close to that.
Does anyone, thank you for everyone for your comments and conversation. It's always interesting conversation. Does anyone have any other questions for Mr. Porter before we let him go? Any last questions? Gabe, did you want to?
I just want to flag one thing when Steve was asking about the presentations, right? And I think this is particularly relevant for Greg. So I'm just going to kind of throw you right in Front Street here. But as a curriculum coordinator, often curriculum coordinators, this is their first administrative position. And, you know, folks aren't coming from being a principal or from being a vice principal into a curriculum coordinator. And what I felt as a curriculum coordinator, even though I had been an administrator, was the work of prep to present to all of you or for the full school committee, that alone was worthy professional development, right? The work it takes for Greg to take the thousands and thousands of thoughts swirling in his brain and distill them down to those few slides and get the priorities named and have the authentic experience to say, these are my priorities, is super relevant, right? It's everything we talk about for kids about authentic project-based learning, right? And having an authentic audience. Greg had a bunch of this stuff in his notes. The task to formalize it is relevant in and of itself, even if nothing else happens. It makes Greg or other coordinators better coordinators after the fact.
And accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for adding that, Gabe. That's really helpful. And I'm glad that this is useful, not just for us, because it's a really great learning opportunity for all of us to really understand what's happening inside buildings, because we're not there. And I know that we sometimes get into the weeds, you know, but we're not here to vote. We're here to learn and to understand and to share our thoughts about the things that we do, you know, sort of have oversight over. So this is really helpful. Helen, did you want to add on?
Yeah,
Jen, I was just
No,
going to
go.
say, you know, I know that so much of your role as school committee members are ambassadors to the work that's happening. And so I want to make sure that you all are well informed around what's working and what might not be, so that you can have honest conversations with the community around what we know is going well and what we're working on. And when someone brings something up, to be able to say, I know they know about this. So I think that piece of that communication piece is really important, at least from my perspective. I think that's really helpful for our team.
Yeah, so one sort of constructive criticism, I hope. I appreciate the way you put things together, Greg, but I'm wondering if for somebody who's not as involved as we are, who doesn't know how all the great things that are happening in the schools, will it come across as too negative, you know? And so I don't know if there's a way to, if you're going to be presenting to the full school committee, which then gets, you know, to a larger audience, if there's another way to frame it that would also, you know, talk about the deficiencies or the, you know, whatever word you want to use, the challenges that we have, and the you know, and where we're doing some of the stuff that's really good and wonderful for kids learning. It's just I was going to write you separately, and then I thought, well, just talk about it here too among ourselves, because all of you are involved in this. It's not just Greg that's presenting it, but I just, I mean, if I'm thinking that when I hear it, then I you know, I worry about what others will hear. And I know that that's, you know, you're trying to help us to understand, you know, more detailed stuff that other people, you know, they think my kid's getting a great, you know, education. I don't see these things missing necessarily.
No, certainly. And I think in again, depending on the direction, if my next step is to present to the full committee, I can certainly work with Michelle and Gabe and Leslie on exactly what you're talking about. I think, yeah, I had similar thoughts about how exactly this, you know, again, this being my first presentation, how it would be received. And, you know, for me as a teacher, I almost think of like the evaluation process. Like I want people to tell me where I'm at, you know? And so what I was really trying to do is be as clear with that. And again, and I know that because of the state of things, there's a lot of area for what I called opportunity. But there is so much, again, if I undersold it, there's so much incredible work happening that I certainly could very intentionally and thoughtfully think about how to, weave that, better weave that in for a broader
And
audience.
the issue of also getting to the state frameworks, we've had how many curriculum coordinators in the last, from 2018 till now, in social studies, we've had a pandemic, there's a lot that has happened, so that if we're not exactly in alignment, it doesn't mean we're not teaching,
Certainly.
I think it's really important that we talk about what we need to work on, because that's how we advocate for funding and for time and for resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think actually, given some of Steve's comments about social studies, right? I felt this as a coordinator. I think Greg is starting to feel it and identified some of it, right? And I think Emily spoke to it a little bit as a science coordinator. That's the work we need to do. I know certain other areas, right, have often and historically felt needs to advocate for their programs in some strong ways. And so, what we have to do is talk about the work to do. It's the same as with all of our schools, whether it's talking about the deficiencies of the Pierce building so that we can build a new building. It doesn't mean kids are unsafe on a day-to-day basis in Pierce. But if we don't make that argument, we don't get a new building for Pierce, right? So in some ways, this is the curricular version of that. And while I appreciate the desire to say what's good, in this context, especially in the opportunity to advocate to all of you as school committee members, this is what we need. We need to say it so that we can actually fix it and work on it. So that a couple of years from now, Greg comes back and says, we got all this work done. Here's the exciting things, right? Here's the curriculum we can now offer because of the work we did.
So one of the things that we didn't get to was what staffing are you talking about? Because you had said you need staffing. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah. So again, I don't know how far to go down into the rabbit hole, but I think, when I look at the work that has to be done and knowing that it's a department of one, right? Knowing that there's 8 and actually really 9 grade levels, 10 if I'm going back to, if we're talking pre-K, in order to effectively implement new curriculum, coach up teachers, if I could wave a magic wand, I would have other district-wide positions or coaches, much like other departments, such that I could, divide and conquer, so to speak. And I have some other creative, and again, I know this is not the FTE conversation time, and Leslie and Gabe and Michelle have been really thoughtful and direct with me about where we are. But I also have some other ideas around sort of creative solutions, potential teacher leadership opportunities in ways that I could, I could move the work in a different way. So, but I know that might be a conversation for another day.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to add my 2 cents onto that conversation I was just sort of listening to. And I do think it's important to name, what the work is. And we've done that with previous ones. I do think it's important for us to know where we're at and where we need to go so that we know we have a direction and we have a path. And I was sort of listening to all that feedback and thinking, well, I think it's important to name, to have the information that we need in order to advocate for what we need and to know where we're going to go. And then, maybe in a sort of another middle road there is, adding in some celebrations and highlights of some really cool stuff that's happening. If we're going to, to a next iteration of a presentation, maybe we can add some in, to Helen's point, to sort of celebrate the things that are going really well, maybe some examples of really cool interdisciplinary work or the civic action project or something to really, focus and rally about what's going well and how we'd like to do more of that and what we need to do that work. The work needs to be done to align the 2018 standards. This isn't just a social studies issue, and it's not just a Brookline issue. It just, the work needs to be done, and it takes time. And we, as you said, Helen, we've had a number of people moving in positions, so it takes time. We respect that. We understand it. At the same time, we're also trying to pedal as fast as possible, so it's a balance. But this is a good conversation. I actually really like this conversation. I think it's productive. So I hope that people see, the subcommittee as a place for conversation. And so presentations are great, and conversations even better because it makes the work move forward. So that's great. All right, it's already 6:05, and even though we've made our meetings a half an hour longer, we still seem to run out of time. Leslie and I were so sure when we talked about this agenda that no problem, we can cover these 3 things. We haven't even gone to Leslie's OTL update report yet. Greg, thank you so much for coming, and to everyone in OTL for supporting and jumping in. It's a team effort. It takes a village. So I'm really glad. It's nice to see such great collaboration. Ms. Miller, how are you feeling about your OTL update? Are there things that we really need to do? I'm also thinking about, possible agenda items for April. I think we're already overbooked for May, and I'm hoping we might be able to move one of the conversations that might have been targeted for May up to April. So just in context for my big question I just asked you about where you are with today's update, just sort of thinking long-term and what information you might have. We have a conversation upcoming at some point about time on learning. You mentioned maybe May. We just talked about an update on understanding our differences. I'm wondering if that could be in April. Our next meeting is April 26th, so that's 5-ish weeks from now. And I'm wondering if teacher feedback could feasibly be collected in that time period for us to reflect on. Maybe like a Google form, or I don't know. I'm not sure. That's in the weeds. That's not my business. And then we also have Matt Dubois reached out about doing an update on the DESE SEL grant, possibly in May. I don't know if that could be an April thing. So now that I've said all the things that are in my brain, what are your thoughts about the rest of our agenda items?
If everyone maybe could commit to, let's say, 5 to 7 more minutes, and we'll run down just a couple of the updates. Does that make sense? This is a popular place, because I will say I was talking to Tanya Alvarado, the World Language Coordinator. She said, when am I going to subcommittee? So I was thinking April, but maybe not. So we'll have to talk about that. So let's go really quickly. So I wanted to give a Title I update, just in terms of some of the really targeted programming that we have happening. Gabe, do you want to talk really quickly about just BHS? And this is important to me just because I know that it's new that BHS is considered Title I. So I want the committee to understand how we're using those dollars and how it's benefiting that school community.
Yeah, this is pretty quick. We had during February break a Steps to Success Acceleration Academy. It's a new type of wraparound intervention to support. Sophia Williams-Lewis, our new director, just jumped right on it. We had a very small window. She got it all together in about 2, maybe 3 weeks. And we targeted juniors and seniors at the high school who are in danger of failing, and also in danger of not graduating, and also in steps to success, because we have to target the funds from Title I. And we had, I want to say, about a dozen students. I don't have the number exact, because it was a little bit fluid, where we had 2 days. Students received support and help to either catch up on second semester stuff that maybe they'd already slipped on a little bit. Some students were doing it to get ahead and preview content and material. We had a variety of teachers. The STEPS advisors were there, of course. And they even zoomed in some kids who were on vacation out of state, because kids wanted to come in for a little bit of help and get a couple hours. So it was a really great opportunity. Again, we got a good number of kids on pretty short notice. And Sophia and the team are gearing up to do that again for the April break with more notice and hopefully more robust support, and kind of build that into a more ongoing practice, so that we're continuing to really support the wraparound services for STEPS that we say we do.
And very similarly, Lincoln and FRR, both school leaders, Brian and Jen, are organizing very specific supports for students. So at Lincoln, we have a tutoring program that's taking place specifically for 8th graders that are having some academic struggles. And so I think, you know, we talk a lot about educators just being really burned out this year, especially from COVID, but they're rising to the occasion and they're coming through for our kiddos, especially the ones who really need the additional support. So there's a lot of very targeted programming that's happening that I'm really happy about. So that's one of the updates. And also a good portion of our Title I funding goes towards summer programming. And so just a really quick update, we've sent out, well, I just added this number, then I think almost 1,200, so let's see, 763 plus 520, almost 1,200 invitations for K-8 students to join summer programming. And so far, we have 2 programs. We have Star Academy and we have Project Discovery. In Star Academy, 269 students have already registered. And in Project Discovery, we have 153 students that are registered. And so those registrations just went out. So we're going to continue to monitor those. And we hope to have a really, just a really robust program with any student that is needing summer support should be able to get it with us. And so that's a little bit of an update as to where we are with that. Michelle, do you want to talk really quickly about the dyslexia screener?
Sure. We've been meeting with the CST leaders and before this week, and we had shared with them that we had our dyslexia screener, that we were ready to engage with teachers to have them meet the vendors and understand the process, also understand what it is that we were looking for. And yesterday we had our first meeting, and so they helped us get teachers engaged. Yesterday we had our first meeting with teachers and we had 28 educators join us in grades K through 3, in addition to literacy specialists, special educators, a team chair. And so we had a nice group with the first vendor that we met with, and we got some really good feedback from the teachers and learned a lot about some of the things that we hadn't thought about. And so we have 2 more vendors coming, and I think that you know, we're going to be able to find a good match for this work. And then the next step from that will be to help teachers understand, like, what's the roadmap once you have a screener in place. And so we've just begun the work, but we're excited and we had an enthusiastic group. Helen, did you have a question about that?
Quick one.
Sure.
So the funding for whatever screener we decide on, is that in the next year's budget?
It's no, because it's going to come out of IDEA.
Oh,
So
so the
we're gonna,
revolving fund.
because this is being early in, and Casey may be in the car, being early in identifying students, or at least finding students who are at risk, is one of our goals, and it's one of our goals through our disproportionality plan. So we were able to figure it through IDEA.
I
And
said
then Gabe,
excellent. Sorry, I was on mute.
Gabe, do you want to just let everyone know where we are with the middle school review?
Yeah, so got a really good set of feedback from everyone, compiled that all and wrote it into recommendations. Also was able to open the dollars packets. We don't get to look at those until we've done our review from finance. And so I've got a recommendation for the superintendent. There's just been a couple other things on his plate, as you might imagine. Yeah, it's in Leslie's hands right there. So once he gives us the thumbs up or not, right, we will have our next step. And but assuming he gives us the thumbs up, we'll start negotiations with the winning bidder, and I'll be able to announce that at that time. I just don't want to prematurely announce anything if he has a different perspective than I do, or than the team, really, because the reviewers were remarkably consistent, I would say. So very close.
I think that's like the kind of big ticket items. I mean, there were a couple other things, but they're things that we can discuss later. You know, we have an EL tiered focus monitoring review which we're required to do via the state. And we did have some funding. Mindy, Michelle and I were talking about how we could get focus groups together and who would lead them. And I said, come on, we don't have the capacity to really do this well. We want to really do this properly. And so we were able to get a consultant for a very reasonable price who will facilitate that work for us. And so that is starting now as well. And so one of the things that I just also wanted to say to the committee is I know we have a lot of gathering of data kind of things going on with different reports and audits. But I think now is a really good time to do that because so much of the team is new. And so we can have that information as baseline information, and it will really guide and support us in strategically planning our next steps. So just wanted to say that. But I think, Jennifer, those are like the big kind of timely pressing things. I think other things we can certainly table until the next time we're together.
Does anyone have any questions on the goals updates? Thank you. It's so helpful. It's really great, I think, to hear sort of what's going on, what's the update, and we come back to it. It's really helpful. And it helps to keep the community informed as well and let them know these are the things that are on our minds. This is some of the big work that we're doing. Does anyone have any new business? Okay, so I think we just need to, unless anyone wants to throw it as new business topics that they think we should take up at an upcoming meeting. I have a running list. We have a bunch of things. So we will meet again on Tuesday, April 26th. The May meeting is May 17th. So there's a longer window between this meeting and the April meeting, and then a shorter window between April 26th and May 17th. So we do have a bit of time. Sorry, Helen, go ahead.
It's April 27th, Tuesday.
Oh, well.
At least if I looked at the right calendar.
Well, I believe you, Helen, I believe you.
It's Tuesday, right? Yeah.
No, yeah, I think maybe you're on a different calendar year. I don't know. My Google.
Oh my God.
What?
Oh, wow. You're right. I was on 2021. So sorry.
No, that's okay. I was like, wow, I wrote that down wrong. That's not very.
No, it's
like
my
it.
fault. And we did have one on the 27th last year.
Okay, good. Okay, so it's Tuesday, the 26th. So we do have a chunk of time, for work between now and then a shorter window between April and May. So Leslie and I will coordinate and we'll solidify a schedule a little bit closer and see where everyone's at. Does that sound good? Okay. All right. And thank you. I think I need to give a shout out. Susan was our school committee person to coordinate with Gabe on the middle school review and provide input. So understanding that it was quite a large volume of paper. I want to give Susan a shout out for doing that work. Thank you, Susan.
My pleasure. I hope my comments were helpful. I wrote an essay for a game. So anyway, some of it was helpful, which it may or may not have been.
That was definitely great. I appreciate it. I would rather have too much than too little in this context.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for all of your hard work. With that, it is 6:18 and we will close ourselves out. Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy some time with your loved ones. Bye.
Bye-bye.